There's loads of great stuff in this episode, but listen, before we get going, I would love it if you could subscribe, but as well as that, just hit the notification bell as well, because as soon as there's a new episode or something fresh from all of us, you will get it first. But for now, grab a pen and paper, because I think you might need to make some notes on this episode. It's full of brilliant takeaways. Enjoy. Here we go. It's a pleasure to welcome to the podcast the Leeds Rhinos Director of Rugby, Kevin Sinfield, MBE. Kevin, nice to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of the show, so it's a huge honour.
Great. Well, then you'll know what the first question is. What is high performance?
Yeah, I've heard this answered a few different ways, and I think probably depends on who you are and where you are in your sport. But I think for where I am at this moment in time, it's certainly getting the best out of yourself, and especially the people around you, whilst also constantly striving for improvements. And then I think within that, it's having the courage to take some risks. I think all people who perform at that level need to take some risks at different times.
The problem with taking risks, though, is that they're scary. They often come with the chance of failure. And I think for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, Kevin, getting past the risk of the failure is one of the biggest stumbling blocks. When did you learn to be able to push past that?
Probably early on in sort of my rugby career. I got made captain at 22 of Leeds Rhinos, and you found out pretty quickly that the club hadn't won many trophies. We'd not won a championship for 32 years. Or 31 years when I got the job. And I realised pretty quickly if we wanted to change and we wanted to get the team on track and to be challenging for trophies again, there had to be some unpopular decisions made and some unpopular choices. And within that, certainly is, at times putting yourself out there, showing your courage, and just having the courage to fight through some of that negativity, some of those older pros who'd been around a long time, who could have quite easily ripped to pieces some of the things I was suggesting or some of the opinions I had. But what you find is that it was probably the perfect time for us to implement some change. And I was very, very fortunate that our older senior players hadn't won many trophies, so they were desperate to win and were willing to try anything. So it was almost some great ingredients thrown into a cauldron, and thankfully, although at the time, I was really concerned about how some things may land, as soon as you start to get one or two results, people jump on board with it.
So can I ask you around that culture that you created then, Kev? Because we have a lot of people listen to this podcast from a range of different backgrounds, whether they're teachers, medics, or amateur or professional sports people or business. And they're all listening to find out what that secret sauce is around high-performing, successful cultures. So how would you define that then?
I'd start by saying it's not just one person's job. I think it's, if you're part of an high-performing team or you work in an office, or you're a fireman and you work part of the team, whatever it is you do, there has to be a cause, there has to be a common goal that you all share. There has to be an element of sacrifice within there. There has to be an element of people being unselfish. But a lot of, when I look back on my playing career and the changes that we made, it was almost, we had the perfect circumstances. We just needed some good people to implement them. And I'm going to keep using this quite a bit because this is how I lived it, but I just feel so fortunate because I'm grateful because the people I were around were very like-minded and just wanted to win, but also wanted to win the right way. Had a lot of integrity about what they were trying to instill, the way we wanted to go about some things. And ultimately, if you pull culture apart, in my own opinion, it's the beliefs and behaviours that people have and show. And when you unpick some of that again, you end up right back at your standards. What standards do you live by? And for us, we without saying it, but we were happy to hold each other accountable in the right way. And we were respectful in that. But ultimately, the driving force was always that the team came first. And if that meant sometimes your nose would put out of joint, You dealt with it and you got on with it and you took it in the right way. And ultimately, I suppose if I look back now and if you wanted a phrase of what that was, probably the standards you're prepared to walk by are the standards you're prepared to accept. And, we knew if there was something needed saying and we didn't address it, that it could fester and cause an issue down the line. But I absolutely mean this. I was captain of the side for 13 years, but I had some wonderful leaders around me that without them, we wouldn't have got anywhere near what we did. They were so important to me, the support they gave me, but also at different times, for me to have the humility to say, you're better at this than me, or I think actually your voice here would resonate far further than what mine would. Just having that appreciation, understanding of the people that were in and around me, then I was so fortunate.
Well, that intrigues me, Kev, because you had some people that fitted a stereotype of being what you'd imagine a leader to be within a very sort of macho sport like rugby league. You had some big guys that had loud voices and big characters to go with it. And yet I always perceived that you were more of a quiet leader, that you led through example. So how did you go about finding your place in a dressing room like that as a leader to set those standards and be listened to and followed?
Well, I think, first of all, actions speak louder than words. So people want to see the behaviours. They're the things that stand out more. They're the things that carry far more weight than any dressing room team talk. People want to see you live a certain way 24/7. And I suppose I was quite lucky at an early age at a couple of real poignant moments in my childhood that stand out, and have stuck with me ever since. But you've probably heard me say this before, Damien. Physically, I wasn't particularly gifted as an athlete, as a rugby player. But what I was prepared to do was make myself the most committed, and what came with that was a way you live your life. You can't just switch a light on and expect to be a wonderful player. It doesn't just happen. So I committed everything I had to do. I had to it, and a big part of that within that was I'm in a team sport, and the balancing act between being self-sacrificing, but also making sure my body and my needs got what they needed so that I could perform my role in the team. So it was a real balancing act, but I suppose the team, unbeknown to any of us, was put together with a completely different set of vitamins and minerals, if you like. And we all know our own bodies. You have to have a bit of everything. And whether it was put together that way, I'm not so sure there was that much science behind it. But actually, we had a bit of everything in that team. And it made it easier for me to be able to behave, because you find your way in a family, don't you? I had an older brother and an older sister, and subconsciously you find your way to be able to get attention and be able to breathe and grow. And I think that's what you do in a team sport.
I think that character is something that you create rather than inherit. So what were the things that happened in your childhood that you can relate to now that you think built the character that got you to the top of the rugby world?
Really good question, Jay. There's two things. And I'll talk about one one's to do with being a captain, and the other one's to do with being me and the way I live my life. So in 1992, I was fortunate enough to play for Oldham Schools against Dewsbury and Batley in a curtain raiser at Wembley before a Challenge Cup final. The final was Wigan versus Castleford. And we played this game at Wembley. It started out, they kicked off. There'd be about 12,000 people in at Wembley at the time. But by the time our game was coming to a close, there'd be about 70,000 people packed in this old Wembley. We got a quick shower, took our seat in the stand to watch the main event. I remember being sat there looking around. I'm 11-year-old and thinking, you can do this for a job. You can actually play rugby for a job and get paid for it. And at that moment, it clicked, and I thought, this is what I want to do. This is what my life, if I could pick now, this is what it'd look like. I want to play in front of these big crowds. I want to represent whichever team it was and win trophies. And I knew I had some talent. I knew I could play, but I knew I didn't have an X factor. I didn't have a secret ingredient that a lot of kids have. And I decided to make my commitment. And I decided from that day on that I was going to throw everything at my rugby career. I never weren't good enough. If I got injured, if something went wrong, I was determined not to be a bloke who propped up a bar somewhere and said, coulda, woulda, shoulda. I wanted to get rid of all of that and go, I'm going to throw everything at this and I'll be able to live myself for the rest of my life if it don't work. But if it does, we're going to have some good times. The second one, and I get asked this quite a bit because it was captain at a professional club for 13 years and that's quite a long time when you think, I had got given a job at 22 and seeing a whole host of different teams and environments within that. But I sort of got made captain of a Lancashire team at under 10s. You're going to laugh at this, right? You're going to laugh. But I played for Lancashire under 9s and I'm a real proud Lancashire man, although I've represented a Yorkshire team for my whole professional career. But I represent Lancashire under 9s and we were playing away at Hull. And I've been playing rugby for a couple of years and I remember getting on this coach, driving all the way to Hull. My mum and dad were proud as punch that little Kevin was playing for Lancashire. And I was a substitute that day and I got on for the final 2 minutes. And we got, after the game, showered, got on the bus on the way back. And I remember thinking to myself, I drove all the way up to Hull from Oldham on a bus. I played 2 minutes. My mum and dad are chuffed to bits, but I'm not happy. This isn't enough for me. So next year, when this Lancashire team's picked, I'm going to be in it. I'm going to make sure I play and I start. So the following year, we go for Lancashire trial and you get split up into different teams and you put with players from all different amateur clubs, community clubs now they're called, from around the northwest or around the Lancashire region. And I remember looking at my team thinking, I'm going to struggle today. I'm going to struggle to stand out and get in this side unless I can get the best out of these around me. So I spent the next 45 minutes of this trial encouraging, pushing, driving, motivating every single one of these players in my team, and we smashed everybody on this trial. I get picked and I get made captain. And I'm sure I got made captain because of how I spoke to these kids at 10-year-old right back in 1990, 1991. From then on, every team I played in, at some stage I got made captain of. And I reckon, when I roll back my career, when people look for leaders, a lot of the time they go to what they know or they go to somebody who was previously had that type of role. And I reckon just from being really, really fortunate, right place at right time at different stages in my career, you get made captain because you've done it before and you've done an half a decent job. And so if you can see those two things, I'm 10 on the captaincy one. I'm 11 at playing at Wembley. Just had such an impact on my childhood, and actually I've still have a massive impact on me now. They happened, and I look back and think, wow, without those two experiences, would I be the bloke I am today? The answer would be probably not.
What intrigues me about that, though, Kev, is that to have that realization at such a young age is one thing, but then secondly, to have the courage to actually implement it is another. Like, I'll give you an anecdote, and I told Jake this off air, that somebody that we both know told me a great story about you around that time when you were playing for Lancashire, that he said, like, one night you all went out to the cinema, and he said, and everyone sort of, like as young kids do, all piled in on the sweets and the fizzy drinks. And he said, and you turned up with a bag full of fruit that you'd already chopped at home, so you weren't tempted by the sweets. And the person that told it me was saying it in absolute awe that you had that courage to stand apart from the group, even at a really young age where following the pack would have been easier to do it. So where does that come from, that strength of character? What's your background like that developed it?
Yeah, a good question. I think probably growing up in a typical working class Oldham family, it certainly had a huge effect on me. I shared a bedroom with my older brother Ian till I was 15. He's 3 years older than me. I've got an older sister who's 5.5 years older. Certainly they had a huge effect on my character. I think being the youngest, we didn't go without anything, but it weren't always the thing you would have, when some of my mates at school were in Adidas and Nike, I was in different brands, and you got that, you understood it. My mum and dad did absolutely everything they could. And I'm so proud of my upbringing. It was a really, really good childhood. But I signed professional at 13, Damien, and when you sign professional that young, and it's very, very different now because of scholarships and there's academies, but back then, you started getting paid at 13, and straight away you start to feel the pressure and the scrutiny. And I think being able to handle that and deal with it from being 13, to understand what it was like to play for Rhinos. I remember Davey was a 16-year-old for the first team. To understand so early on in my career at different points that you had to survive and find a way to survive and find a way of dealing with things, and understand that, certainly you didn't have all the answers, and at times you found out the hard way, but it was... I do, and I'm going to come back to it again. I feel so lucky and fortunate because some of the experiences I've had at such an early age, almost in front of people who were my age or a year above or 2 years above, just gave me enough of an insight each time just to nudge me on a bit further.
Damien often, he talks about success leaving clues. He talks about people using evidence in front of them to realise that they're doing the right thing. It strikes me that it was so important for you at really a young age to make these big decisions and to see that they worked. It was almost like maybe you felt like you knew a secret at that point that other people didn't, that you had a way of having an impact in any situation.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I think looking back now, I'm certainly a pleaser. So if you start out down a path and you're getting patted on the back for it, as a kid, you carry on, don't you? Yeah. And I suppose my behaviour was being rewarded by being named in different rep teams, being made captain of different rep teams, and it seemed to be working. So you stick with it. I've always trained hard. It was something that I loved training. So actually setting standards in training and behaving the right way was never an issue. The stuff off the field was never particularly an issue for me. It was never hard to go out with my mates back home on a Friday and Saturday night and not have a drink. They just accepted it. They'd known me do that since forever. And then I suppose the most difficult part of my professional career was joining Leeds in those first couple of years of you trying to make those friendships within a team that very much has a drinking culture. That became quite difficult at times, but I think when you stand your ground and you say no a number of times, people start to respect it and understand why.
Did you ever falter and fail? And Matthew McConaughey described it as leaving crumbs. He said, don't leave crumbs. Did you ever leave crumbs and have to go and pick them up afterwards at that point?
No, I was always mega conscious.
Really?
Always. I always felt on guard. Always felt, even so with camera phones now and the media and the way the game changed over my career, just was ultra aware. And I knew the moments when I could let my hair down. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely did that. And I've made plenty of mistakes. I just made sure they weren't in front of the camera and nobody got me on a camera phone. And I'm sure there's probably someone out there who says, yeah, I've got you here. I've got some dirt on you. I'm like everybody else. I'm not an angel. I get stuff wrong and I make mistakes. But I was mega conscious of it the whole time. And what that enabled me to do, certainly when we're in those environments, were to put people in taxis, were to send them home, were to put an arm around people and say, come on, you've had enough. Or we're in the wrong place here. Let's get out of here. Let's move on.
I think it comes with responsibility, I think, at a young age. Mine was very different, but I was in my late teens when I landed a job on Children's BBC. And it was made really clear to us that you have a responsibility to represent kids' telly in the UK. So there wasn't any drinking. There was no going to strip clubs. There was no smoking in a public place. There was no doing anything that didn't feel like a Children's BBC kind of behaviour publicly. But I remember I'd go out and I wouldn't drink. But the following morning, I'd wake up absolutely paranoid about having been out. What if I did something? Did I say something to anyone? I'd lie in bed for not necessarily hours, but probably an hour, replaying the very thing, all the conversations I had, all the people, and it created like a paranoia. But it was a safety net as well. I'm kind of glad I had it because it just meant I didn't make any of those mistakes. I don't know whether you had at any time that anxiety maybe relating to that, which I certainly did.
I reckon working in children's TV, it certainly would have been less forgiving than a rugby club and a rugby environment.
Yeah.
So I probably was able to push the boundaries a bit more than what you were. I think, absolutely, you'd have been dragged over the coals and massively scrutinised. Within our environment, I certainly had some flexibility with my behaviour, because I knew at any time I would never be the worst. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, because if we go back to what I said earlier about vitamins and minerals, there was always the odd rogue within our side who just wanted to break rules and push boundaries and go where he shouldn't. That's part of, you look at any classroom at school, you always have the kid who just wants to be the practical joke, make people laugh, and always getting in trouble. So we had those in the team. That's the need for that within our team was already taken up by somebody else. So I actually always knew there was some safety net there for me, because there was always going to be somebody worse behaved than I was. And it was also my responsibility to make sure that, and a number of others, that for that person who was the worst behaved, he got looked after and cared for and put in a taxi, or, we'd leave one or two of the other ones who liked to stay out a bit longer. That became their responsibility to ensure whoever it was got home properly and safely.
So can I ask you then, Kev, because having been around the setup where you were so well respected, I know some of these characters that you're describing about that would have pushed the envelope or misbehaved or got themselves into trouble. And I was always intrigued to watch how you handled them. And I always think that when you spoke to them, they did listen. I saw them sort of like that facade, that front would drop away when you went and spoke to them. But I think it'd be helpful for people listening to this to understand, how did you deal with people that did step out of line within your environment where you were captain?
I have a firm belief that your senior players run your club. And I find that now in the role that I've got the Rhinos, the senior players are so important because they set the standards. They make people accountable. And effectively all the big decisions, that they have such an influence throughout the group that they make sure things get done. So I suppose because we had such a difference of leaders within the group, at any one time, it'd be really easy for me to whisper in one of our leaders' ear and say, "You be good cop, I'll be bad cop," or flick it around. And we tag team up a fair bit. And I think at times I had no doubt that, players rolled their eyes at me. "Oh, look at you, Mr. Perfect. You never do anything wrong." And I knew that wasn't true. I knew I'd got lots wrong and made lots of mistakes. But ultimately, I hope they respected me enough to realise I was talking to them because I cared about them. And I cared about the team. And I cared about keeping our environment secure, our environment, an environment that we were able to tell each other exactly what we thought of each other. But when we stepped over that white line, we were together as a unit and we'd cover each other's backsides no matter what had gone on off the pitch. So I still feel that now. I've been approached a number of times since I finished playing about doing an autobiography, and as players do with, whatever sports people you are. But there's some stories that I just wouldn't tell. They're not for anybody else. They were for our dressing room at a certain time, and they stay within my own mind and whoever was involved's mind. Because ultimately, when we crossed that line, the fact that some of those stories, anecdotes, things that happened never got out, those players repaid us in how they performed on the field. And very, very quickly, if somebody was so far gone, so far out of line, they didn't last long. They stood out like sore thumbs, and the coaching team, your management team moved them on very quickly. So we were more than happy to carry a bit of fat, if you like. But when it got to the stage when it were affecting your team harmony, then that's when the coach stepped in and understood his role in it.
Have you listened to the Sia Khaleesi episode that we did?
No, I haven't, no.
When you listen to that, he talks really well about emotionally connecting with the players in the dressing room in a way that perhaps traditionally 15 or 20 years ago you wouldn't have seen in any professional sports. because you said that when it really mattered on the pitch, the fact that you had a hug with your teammate, you'd spoken about the difficulty in their marriage, you'd had a discussion about an ill child, you'd gone forehead to forehead and told them that you'll do anything for them. He said, if you can get to that place with them, when you're out on the rugby field and it's backs against the wall and it really matters, you look across and you don't just see a teammate, you see a friend, you see someone you're emotionally connected to. Is that an experience you can relate to from your time as a player?
Very much so. Very much so. I think what goes on off the field determines what happens on it. Now, I have a couple of quotes that I say to myself all the time, but certainly as a player, in terms of training and behaving, I always felt what you did away from training was more important than anything you did at training. When nobody was watching, that was when you were really tested. But if you could deliver when nobody was watching, it was really easy to do it when thousands are watching. But certainly as a team, what went on behind closed doors, a bit like a family, and I think, we all have different family makeups when we grow up. But I remember stepping out of line as a kid. I remember my brother doing it a fair bit more than I did. But it was all right for my mum and dad to be critical of him internally, but externally, they were so protective of him and of me. And I think that's probably how our teams operated. Internally, we were all right being critical of each other, as long as it was respectful and in the right way. But actually, the outer world saw this completely unified group. And I think those that are involved in that draw strength from it and trust in it. And it's absolutely transforms onto the field. When you need somebody, when the bullets are being fired and you're 79 minutes in, you need a try, you're on your own goal line, you're really struggling as a group, everybody's gone. That's when you rely on the things that they can't teach you in a classroom. They can't teach you in a video session. They can't teach you in a fitness session. You either got it or you haven't, and that comes from relationships that you built away.
So was there one incident you can think of, Kev, where that trust that you developed away from the training ground manifested itself on a training field that could illustrate the point?
Yeah, there'd be a number of them. Damien. I think, I'll give one example. We played in a playoff game back in 2012. And we were at Catalan away, and a guy who had huge respect for, but had a really checkered past, was playing in our team and had, a number of struggles throughout that year. And we're backs against the wall. We're over in France. We'd finished 5th that year. We're trying to plot our way through. We'd just been pumped off Warrington in the Challenge Cup final, trying to find a path through to get to a grand final, make sure the season went a flop. And this one guy who's gone through a fair bit just comes up with a game-changing run for us and sets up a try. And, for anybody who's a Leeds fan, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But just actually, he wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for the support or wasn't for the belief that the group had given him. Do you know what I mean? There was so much going on away from here, and almost like he had two families. The family away from Leeds Rhinos was, he was struggling with a little bit, but absolutely the Leeds Rhinos family was his rock and believed in him and understood that we were here to help him and care for him, and he delivered. He came up with it.
There'll be people, Kevin, listening to this who maybe would struggle to believe they could have the mindset you had as an 11-year-old, but they would absolutely love to really understand the specifics you did for creating cultures and dealing with people and emotionally connecting on a different level. You mentioned there's a couple of sort of phrases or quotes that you live with. Could you share with us the sort of things that you say to yourself, the self-talk that you think has been crucial?
Yeah, my favourite one is to become a champion, you have to be a champion at home first. I use that all the time. So that probably...
Why does that mean so much to you?
Because actually, that's probably how I lived my life from being 11. I understood that, throwing everything at what I wanted to do and be was really, really important. But there was a way of doing it as well. I'm really big on integrity and having just being really honest with people. And sometimes I know that can come back and bite you on the backside, but it allows me to look in the mirror every day and know that sometimes, well, you know, if I've got this wrong because I've been too honest, I can accept that. I'm all right with it. I've said it. I said the other one already before. It's what you do when nobody's watching. And another one I came across, and it's amazing where you get different quotes from Jake, because do you remember when Falcao signed for United?
Yeah.
So he was going through a really rough patch, and we're going back to 2015. And I had a pretty rough patch in 2015. We won the treble that year, and it was a wonderful season, but I found myself halfway through it and I was out of the team, staring down the barrel of my final season of playing league, of being captain in my 13th year, and I can't get in the team. But Falcao was struggling at United, and I saw a quote his mum said, right, which is crazy, isn't it? But Falcao's mum said, and it was translated, and basically it was, through adversity comes blessings. And I'm not religious, but that's pretty much how my career has been. You know, whenever I've been faced with a rough moment, a bad time, an injury, a poor performance, not being picked for a side, that's when it's really tested me and brought the best out of me. And it's certainly something that sticks with me every day now. Whenever it's going tough, and I know that there's going to be some good times. Might not be straight away, but if you work hard enough, I'll make it happen.
See, but as I'm hearing that, Kevin, I'm reminded of a conversation we had back in 2008 when we were in Australia. And I remember you saying to me that we were going to do the semi-final of the Rugby League World Cup, and you'd been left out of the team. And I remember me and you talking, and you had a lovely phrase that stuck with me that I still use today, where it's good things happen for good people. And you had that optimism that things would turn, things would get better. Now, as a child of two boys yourself, and there's a lot of people listening to this that'll be thinking about how they can relate your consistency of character to their own children. What kind of lessons do you pass on to them that try to instill that same consistency in them?
Yeah, I think that's it's quite tough, that, because I think the best example of it is having the experience yourself. You're right, I can remember that like it was yesterday, being left out for that semi-final. My youngest, who would have been 10 months old, was in hospital with bronchitis. So there's a fair bit going on. And it hurts, doesn't it? It hurts when you get left out of the side, especially a game of that magnitude. It's for your country, and it's tough. But I think I do believe it. Good things happen to good people. As you've probably seen, and how I've talked today about how fortunate I've been at different times. If you work hard enough, you make good things happen as well. And I got an experience of being left out of a side when I was 19. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. I got left out of a cup final. So I got an understanding really early on how to deal with some of the things that happen in professional sport. And I was able to draw on that again in 2008. But it certainly is tough. I think as I got older, I got better at dealing with those difficult times. I understood that pulling the covers over and staying in bed because I didn't want to face it wasn't going to fix it. You had to get up and face it, no matter how much it hurt. And actually, the irony in this, the longer you leave it laying in that bed where you think it's going to help, it makes it worse. So you're better off getting yourself up and throwing yourself at it and going, right, well, at some stage I've got to fix it. So let's start fixing it now. And understanding that those difficult times are really important, and they get thrown at you from time to test you. That's life. So when I look at my career, I certainly got better at dealing with it. I'm still not great at it, by the way. It still affects me and hurts me. But if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same, I know it's a phrase that means a lot to you, Damien, but absolutely, as I got older, I got so much better at dealing with that roller coaster and those highs and lows. I certainly became more balanced, and hopefully through how I've behaved at home and through the experiences my children have seen firsthand, they've understood that. Hopefully I pass some of that on. And I don't get it right all the time.
How old are your children, Kevin?
16 and 12.
So if I went to them both and I said, tell me the most important message that your dad has ever given you, or the biggest thing you've learned from your dad, what do you think they'd say?
It'd probably be something like, make sure you enjoy what you do. It'd be something like that. So, they both play sport, and ultimately we all have our own reasons of why we should take part in sport, why we should be in team sport. And there are certainly some health benefits, but the benefits I got from playing team sport, we're all about enjoyment. We're all about making friends and building relationships and sharing in memories with a group. And that's certainly something I tried to pass on to them, about enjoying the sport, enjoying what they do, especially if you're going to spend a large part of your life sitting with school. You spend such a large chunk of your life at school. I know they're not at the minute, but you spend such a large time there. You should try and find a way of enjoying it, whatever it is. Same with work. I know that isn't easy for everybody. I know people are in jobs that they don't want to be in. People find themselves stuck and they're in a rut, but you got to find something that drives you, that gives you some enjoyment.
It reminds me of the conversation we had with Johnny Wilkinson, where he spoke to us about being totally present in the moment, not worrying about yesterday, not worrying about tomorrow, which is an easy thing to say and quite a difficult thing to do. But it was only a couple of days after that, when I was doing some work, and it wouldn't be polite to say on here who I was working for and what I was doing, but I just didn't want to do it, right? And actually, it was the conversation with Johnny Wilkinson where I thought to myself, right, I know for a fact that I am due to be here until 3:30. I am not leaving a minute before and probably not a minute after. So I can either choose to have this mindset of, I don't really want to be here, the time's dragging on, I'll keep looking at my watch, I wish today wasn't happening, or I can totally invest in that moment. Stephen Gerrard told us all in, didn't he, on his podcast episode? And, Johnny Wilkinson spoke about being absolutely present in that moment. And I thought, well, I'll just be totally present. I'll just talk to these people, find out about them, invest in what I'm doing in this moment. And actually, it totally changed the experience of what in my head was going to be a pretty dull couple of hours.
Yeah, that's great. I think the big point there is you accepted it. You accepted it, Jake. And I found that, all the time. I recently did the 7 and 7, and 3 days in, I had no sleep. I was making a big deal about it. But actually, I just accepted this is going to be part of the challenge. I'm not going to get any sleep all week. So get your head around it. And after that moment, I actually started to sleep. So a lot of it is about accepting it. I reckon something you touched on there, which, we all have the ability to choose. And we all have, it's linked closely with your attitude and how you go about your day-to-day stuff. But we always have the ability to choose how we attack things, how we go about things. And we have to remind ourselves of that from time to time, especially when we're in those tough situations. And, get asked to do, bits of speaking, you go into schools, and people ask you now and again, have you got anything we can use? Have you got anything? And there's something I use when I'm really struggling, and I call it, everybody's got a pack of playing cards, and there's 4 aces in it. Well, I always think you've got an ace in your pocket, no matter what happens. And you can play that ace at any time. And that ace you can give to people, and basically attitude, care and enjoyment. And if at any moment you're struggling a little bit, play that ace card. Remind yourself you have the choice. Remind yourself that you care about yourself and the people you're working with, and put a smile on your face. And very, very quickly you can turn it around.
It's nice. And I imagine the time you spent with Rob is an important reminder for enjoying every moment and realising that you never know what's around the corner. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, for a bloke at 37-year-old who has had such a wonderful career, who's got a lovely family, who's had to fight the way he fought his whole career, because he's 5'4", and in such a physical sport, to be able to achieve what he did is remarkable. To be such a gentleman, to be such a nice lad, to be such a good friend, to have to face what he's facing is not fair. It's not fair. And so for us, for our group, for that team, for our club, to be able to show Rob the love, the care, the respect he deserves in such difficult times, if we can help him just a little bit throughout this, we'll do our absolute best to.
See, there's a word you use there, Kev, that I just find remarkable, both as a male, but also within the sport that you operate in, which is the word love. And yet I feel that contains so much stories, so much anecdotes, but so much meaning. Would you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's certainly different types of love out there, but I think if we think about the friendships and the respect that this club has enabled us to have as people for a period of time. I met Rob when I was 14, he was 12. We came through the ranks together, played 15 years professionally together, sat next to him every day in the dressing room. When I said I'm in the training ground every single day, been on different tours with him, shared some key moments. Both had kids at similar times, both got married at similar times. And that isn't just myself and Rob. You know, there's probably 10 other blokes in that dressing room who've gone through similar sort of things at a similar sort of time. You know, 5 or 6 of us came through together.
Yeah.
And so within that, there's just a natural bond. You've shared so many good times, but it's probably more the difficult times you shared that give you that bond. And so when I say love it, you know, I mean it from a absolute. I'd do anything for him. You know, we all would. The care, the respect we have for him and his family will never change. And I suppose the club has helped us form those bonds and friendships and other things. When you look back on your career, you know, I've been fortunate to play in a number of different championship winning sides, but the friendships and the memories are what's important to me now. And that won't ever change. So for us all to be able to, the club is very, very good at celebrating past teams. And for us, when you meet players you've played alongside for periods of time where you've done something special, that glint in your eye is there. And that's what's so special about seeing Rob when I see him. The glint, the spirit is there.
So for you, and I want to come back to the Rob relationship a little bit later, but I'm also interested that you're now a director of rugby, so you've experienced being part of a culture where those bonds bind you so tightly. How do you go about nurturing those bonds for that next generation that have to play now?
Yeah, that's tough. It's been a real balancing act because you absolutely want them all to feel it. You do, but you understand as well that times moved on a little bit, times have changed, and you don't want to be that old pro that is constantly nagging the new players about what it was like in my generation, what our group was like. So it's a real balancing act, and I think how my role is here is probably different to director of rugby in rugby union. Can have a number of different. It can be in a different form. It can be a head coach. It can be somebody who's completely off field. It can be a combination of the two. Whereas in rugby league, it's quite a new role. We have a head coach who does all the coaching and does a brilliant job. We have a great coaching team. He picks the team, but I oversee the whole rugby department. I oversee, you know, every single element of it. So ensuring the work that goes on from a cultural and environment perspective is really important to me. I think there needs to be an element of tradition and the past within that, but also an understanding that people are different now. You know, social media has such a huge impact on our young players, and how we embrace that and able to use the best of it to make sure that actually when these guys finish playing in 10, 15, 20 years' time, the memories and the friendships are the things that's important to them, not the car they've got, how big their house is. Those sort of things are really important for me.
I'm interested to talk just briefly about social media, because I know that you don't have a social media presence, really, do you? Why is that?
Probably because I'm that stubborn, Jake. I just made the decision sort of as it started to come out, and I'd have been mid-20s, late 20s, and a lot of brands, especially when you're looking for boot deals and bits and pieces, what's your social media presence? Well, I don't have one. I'm sure it went against me, but actually I just didn't want any negative influence. Do you know people I want to speak to? I've got the number. I know where they live. I can sit down and have a chat with them. Yes, I think it's really important to be able to speak to fans and have a general conversation with people. Of course, I understand that, but I never felt rugby league went into a stratosphere where it stopped you talking to the bloke in the street. Rugby league's never been about that, so I felt I didn't need it, and I didn't want to spend all my time on my phone. I didn't want to just be scrolling through and almost inviting people to have a crack at me. I understood that criticism is part of the job and part of being involved in sport. I get that, but I don't want to open myself up to it any more than I have to. Don't get me wrong, we all want to be liked, don't we? We all want to be liked.
Absolutely, yeah, but I think the problem with social media is it doesn't make you... Very, very few people on social media would say they feel loved, because you can get 100 nice comments and the one bad comment is the one that impacts you. And that's something that obviously your young players are having to deal with, because they're having to compare themselves with others. They're having to look at other people's seemingly perfect lives, which they aren't. They're basically comparing, which is what social media is, their real life to the edited version of someone else's life, which it's difficult to argue that that's a healthy mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, but trying to convince them that when they've grown up with it and it's all they know, I feel very lucky that it's never been a part of my life. I think it'd be really difficult for me now to give up my mobile phone, because I know how easy it is, to be able to speak to people and make contact with my family. I wouldn't want to go back to the old, plug-in phone at home and you're back to ringing landlines, and I won't want to go back to that. So I suppose it's quite easy for me to say, having never experienced it. I think it's really hard to give up things that you've got used to, but I've never got used to it. So, but it does have such an influence on players. Dressing rooms are so different now. You walk into a dressing room and many of them are scrolling through the phone, and if you roll back 10 or 15 years, people had phones. People had, the big mobile phones back then that Trigger Happy TV used to, Dom Jolly used to do. But they were in everybody's lockers, and it was just banter and noise and laughter, and dressing rooms are different now. So getting the balance right between banning phones and preventing people from spending all the time on social media, I think we do pretty well as a club. We've got a great media manager who, tries to educate the best he can and get people to understand that actually for every good comment there might be 10 bad ones, and do you need it?
Damien?
I'm just in awe, Kev. That I think I love hearing somebody sort of rail against the norms and going against it. And I think it comes back to that idea of it's entirely consistent with your character. So would you tell us then just about those marathons that you did? Because I know the cause that you were doing it was for Rob and to raise awareness for MND. But tell us what characteristics that you drew on to get you through the physical discomfort of doing 7 back-to-back marathons, all of them in under 4 hours.
Yeah, I've got to say to you, I absolutely loved it. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. It's the thing besides having my kids, having my kids, it's the thing I'm most proud of.
Because?
Just because we threw it together in 6 weeks. We're in the middle of COVID. I spent so much time dealing with my local MP, people in Leeds, and they were brilliant. Debbie Abrams in Oldham was fantastic. Tom O'Riordan was wonderful in Leeds. Judith Blair was wonderful in Leeds. So trying to get clearance, and initially we was going to come down from Scotland and get Big Doddy Weir to start us off.
Right.
Built a decent friendship up with Doddy now on the back of Rob, and which has been wonderful, and work our way down the country and sort of finish at Old Trafford, which was quite poignant for us because it's a place where Rob had played his last game.
Yeah.
It meant a lot to us. We're going to run through Leeds, run through Pontefract where Rob lives, run through Oldham, my hometown. That quickly got scrapped. So we put it together in about 6 weeks, having to jump through a lot of hoops. And I have run marathons. do you know, I've run a number. It was something I wanted to do. When I finished playing, I thought I'll try and run 2 a year for different charities, and I've run a number for Prostate Cancer UK, Jane Tomlinson Appeal. I've run one just before lockdown in 2020 March. I was supposed to be doing Manchester Marathon, that got cancelled. So I thought, well, I've trained for it. I'm still going to do it. I did it for Rob. So 6 weeks out, it was like, I want to do something big for Rob. We're coming up to Christmas. I want him to be able to wake up Christmas morning and enjoy the kids opening, enjoy watching them open the presents. And I put myself in his shoes, which I've done a number of times this year, and thought, you know, as a dad, as a family member, what would give me comfort? And absolutely knowing that everybody was financially secure has been a big driver for me and a number of other teammates. So we'd set a target figure in mind to raise for Rob and his family. We were short. And this is September, probably October time, mid-October. We were short. COVID had put a stop to a lot of the things we had planned. Jamie Peacock had done an ultramarathon. Barry Mack and Keith Senior had done, you know, 3 peaks twice in 24 hours. And I thought, well, I need to do something. At the minute, the best thing for me to do is run. But let's try and get near this magic number, which we thought for Rob and his family. And hence, we wrapped it around the 77,777 was the target. 7 marathons in 7 days. And 6 weeks out, we announced it, and I'm staring down the barrel of, right, well, I'm run fit, and I can run marathons, but I've never run back-to-back marathons. We wanted to put a time limit on it because we wanted people to take us seriously. We felt that, you know, I've seen what Eddie Izzard's doing at the minute, 31 in 31 days, which is unbelievable, remarkable. But we felt to get any traction, given the fact we were only doing 7, we had to put a time limit on it that made people sit up and go, yeah, it's pretty impressive what those guys are doing. So we threw a team together. The hardest bit in all of it was the training. So I've run 3 marathons this year already. 1 for Rob, 2 just, you know, for my own well-being really throughout lockdown and throughout different periods of the year. And a good mate of mine said the best training you can do for a 10 in 10 is a 3 in 3. Now, bearing in mind I'm doing a 7 in 7, I sort of said to him, "You're mad. There's not a chance I'm doing a 3 in 3." 3 days later, I started off on a 3 in 3. And that was the hardest thing I'd ever done, including 7 in 7. I got on day 2. It'd be about an hour into day 2. We're in deepest, darkest Oldham. It's raining. It's like horrendous, windy. And those questions that everybody asks themselves, what on earth are you doing? What are you doing here? Do you know what I mean? Just think about what you're attempting. You're crazy.
So how did you get through that, Kev? Because that really does intrigue me.
Well, it's funny you asked this because it didn't last long. I had a mate who ran day 2 with me. And we got to this point, and I had a mate on his bike as well, Daryl, who came with me for all 7. And I'm like, will you shoot me? I've had enough. I just want to go home. And we came to a hill. No word of a lie. We came to a hill, and I said to me, mate, just get behind me here, get me slipstream, I'll get you up here. I found another gear, blasted to the top, and I was fixed. I was like, we'll just get this done today. And as soon as I get today done, I've done 2. And I'm going to do tomorrow no matter what, because I'm going to prove that I can do 3 in 3. The minute I'd done 3 in 3, I knew we'd do it. I knew we'd do 7.
And tell me,
get them all under 4 hours.
Tell me how you reacted to the amazing response of the media and the public, because if I was, from this conversation we've had, if I was to sum it up, I would say that you're someone who has spent his life earning respect, not earning attention. You only do things for the right reasons. Yet you're the one on the front pages of the papers, not the other people you've mentioned who've also done amazing things for Rob. And it wasn't even Rob on the front pages. It was Kevin put on this pedestal for this amazing achievement. Did that sit comfortably and easy with you?
At times, no. I think you'll hear me refer to the team all the time because I wouldn't have done it without them. They were brilliant. And it absolutely was a team effort. I mentioned Phil, our media manager, earlier. And without Phil driving it like he did from a press point of view, without him putting together the little snippets each day, without him organising the BBC interviews and all the different radio interviews we did, the ITV turn up, Sky Sports News, we just wouldn't have had the cut through, we wouldn't have had the support. I think timing was really important as well. The grand final just finished that weekend when we started. You're back in deepest, darkest COVID. You're on the run up to Christmas. People feel a little bit more generous. And it was just, we couldn't have done it at a more perfect time. The support was incredible. And you're right. There were different times in the marathons. On every day, I broke down and was teary and choked up. And I didn't have a clue why. I just did. And I think the support we got absolutely fueled each run. Day 7 was easy. And I don't say that with any arrogance at all. I just knew we'd do it. And I just knew that actually I ran past my old high school, Saddleworth, and we hit £1 million as soon as I stood outside it. There were a couple of moments where you've gone, we ran past Rob on day 5. He just had this mural put up in Leeds. The second I run past Rob at this mural, we hit £500,000. So everything was telling me, just keep going here, just keep doing what you're doing, because there was a wave of support from everybody, but the M&D community were just, the messages just, for all of us, we were bowled over, we were overwhelmed. And, I've thought about it since, because you do hit a bit of a lull afterwards because you've been on such a high, and although I had no sleep throughout it, was on such a high that I'd do it again tomorrow. And I don't think there's a better feeling than giving people hope and know that you've made a difference. Only a small difference, but we're 2.7 million more of a difference than what would have been if we'd not done it. And if you'd have said to me today, would you have been happy at your initial target, I'd have snapped your hand off.
Yeah. Amazing. What an amazing story. Look, we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast, Kevin, and they will be in awe of the fact that at a young age you were single-minded and you were determined, and you took that into your career and you carried people with you and you lifted others up. And that's probably a big takeaway from this, is that from a young age you realised that maybe your superpower is raising those others up around you. What would you say, though, to people who really want something, but they struggle to know what it is? They want to be successful, they want to have an impact, but they don't know where to turn. Or even the people who know what they want, they're putting the effort in and they're not getting the rewards back, and it can feel difficult sometimes.
I feel a little bit like that myself now. I finished playing and you start a new role. I studied throughout my career, and there's nothing quite gives you the satisfaction that playing gave me. It's different.
Yeah.
So trying to find ways of being able to feel good about yourself, trying to find ways to give you the moment of Andy Dufresne sat on the roof in Shawshank when he feels free and his mates have had a couple of beers. Trying to find those moments are really difficult. They're really difficult, and I think what distorts people's views are how everybody's putting, like we mentioned social media before, everybody's telling you how well they're doing, how good their life is, all on social media, but you unpick that a little bit and you understand that actually, at times you have to struggle a little bit. You have to go through some rough times. You have to persevere with getting where you'd like to be. Now, some people don't know where that is. I understand that. But set off somewhere. Don't stand still. Set off in a direction. Set off with some integrity and some honesty, and you'll find some answers. You'll get there. You'll get where you need to be. And if you don't, change path.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to sit and chat.
Thanks,
Kev. And I want to say, as somebody that's known you a long time, I'm incredibly proud that you've come on here and a wider platform. I know you like operating in the shadows, but I'm delighted that a wider platform of people are going to see just how special a bloke you are. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Cheers, guys. Loved it.
Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, but somehow get involved with the High Performance Podcast and become part of our growing community. Thanks for being part of the adventure.